It is a pleasure to greet you live from San Diego, California, from the studios of KPBS on the campus of San Diego State University. The International Training Center is proud to bring you this important multinational program, which today reaches Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, Bolivia, Argentina, the United States of America, and for the first time, New Zealand in the Pacific. Welcome to all of you. We would like to thank Keystone Communications, Telecomunicaciones de México, PanamSat, and BrazilSat for their satellite linkage services, which allow us to come to all of you directly through the outreach of today's telecommunications. Welcome to the program, The New Multicultural Entrepreneur, Performance and Competitiveness, the second video conference of our 1997 series, Principles for World-Class Performance. I am Armando Osorio, your moderator for this program. All of those participants who are interested in obtaining the certificate of participation for this series, please contact your site coordinators who will inform you about the requirements. Today's program is composed of 2 presentation modules and 2 question and answer sessions. We look forward to your live participation. A direct product of the emerging global marketplace is the new multicultural entrepreneur. His or her values, leadership styles, management, and work strategies are having a profound impact on public and private organizations around the world, both in industrialized as well as in developing nations. Today's video conference seminar will present the complexities and challenges of entrepreneurship in an environment of diversity, the learning and work formats most suitable for team effectiveness, and the growing strategic role of foreign language proficiency and interpretation services, as well as the education and training efforts essential for achieving a truly enriched and global-oriented workplace. It is a pleasure to introduce to you today's expert speakers, Dr. David McClain and Dr. Lily Cheng. Dr. McClain obtained his PhD in economics from Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1974 and has served as senior staff economist on the White House's Council of Economic Advisors in Washington, D.C. in 1979 and 1980. He has served as Dean of the School of Business Administration of the University of Hawaii, where today he is the Henry Walker Jr. Distinguished Professor and Director of the Japan-focused Executive MBA program and co-director of the University of Hawaii APEC Studies Center, East-West Center. In 1986, he received the Broderick Prize for Excellence for his high-quality instructional capacity while in Boston University's School of Management. He has had visiting appointments in important institutions such as Universidad Gabriela Mistral in Santiago de Chile and Meiji and Keio Universities in Tokyo. Dr. McClain has published various articles and works in well-known journals such as Review of Economics and Statistics, besides acting as consultant to various public and private organizations, including the Environmental Protection Agency, Bank of Hawaii, Brookings Institution, Sanyo Electric, and others. Dr. Cheng is Professor of Communicative Disorders and Assistant Dean of Student Affairs and International Development of the College of Health and Human Services at San Diego State. She is also Director of the China Studies Institute, Chair of the International Affairs Board of the City of San Diego, and past President and Fellow of the International Affairs Association of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. Dr. Cheng received a BA in English and Spanish from from National Taiwan University, an MA in Linguistics from Southern Illinois University, and an MA in Speech-Language Pathology from Michigan State University. And her PhD is in Speech-Language Pathology and Multicultural Education from Claremont Graduate School and San Diego State. Dr. Cheng has published numerous works. Her recently published books include Assessing Asian Language Performance, Guidelines for Evaluating Limited English Proficient Students, Myth or Reality, Adaptive Strategies of Asian Americans in California, and Hispanic Children and Adults with Communicative Disorders, among others. Dr. Cheng has served on the Language Panel, National Strategic Research Plan of the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In 1995, Dr. Cheng attended the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China. Welcome. Let us begin with an introductory question. The so-called globalization is truly beginning to reach the smallest and most remote corners of the earth. Does this mean that our ways of acting and traditional work styles will become more and more similar across the world? Or does it make sense for us to maintain our differences as a form of competitive advantage while competing in international markets? Dr. McClain.
Well, Armando, I think both things are true. I think because of the revolution in telecommunications and transportation that continues, it's more and more easy for organizations to benchmark best practice anywhere in the world now, and so work styles will in fact become more similar. But at the same time, as I say later in my presentation, it's really a good idea for national cultures to continue to be preserved and for managers to continue to reflect their own national culture. That is the way to be the most effective multicultural manager.
Yes, I agree. I think it is very nice to have the opportunity to reach all corners of the world. We are, of course, through these communication techniques, we're able to learn from each other. Not only are we going to maintain some of our own work habits and value systems, but also we'll be enriched by learning about other systems. Through this type of multiple perspectives, we'll be able to understand each other a lot better and improve the quality of communication a lot better.
Thank you very much for your comments. Let us begin with Module 1, in which Dr. McClain will explain the realities of today's multicultural organizations.
Buenos dias. 500 years after Columbus' voyage to the New World, transportation and telecommunications innovations are again bringing the peoples of the world and their companies and countries much closer together than ever before. It is natural, therefore, that there is a proliferation of advice about how to think and act in this new world order. This reevaluation of the proper global outlook is qualitatively much more urgent than that necessitated by Columbus' sail. Columbus' contemporaries did not initially have to change their lives all that much to cope with the knowledge that the New World existed. Indeed, the events of 1492 changed the typical European's daily life about as much as man setting foot on the moon changed the typical global citizen's morning-to-night routine in 1969, which is to say, hardly at all. In contrast, the relentless technological progress of recent decades has thrust people and their institutions together with a speed and a degree of turbulence, and in greater numbers than ever experienced before in human history. Development of a new worldview becomes not just something one should do, but something one must do. Today, I want to share with you my perspective on what it takes to become a multicultural entrepreneur who can contribute to the performance and competitiveness not only of his or her own firm, but also in the host and home countries in which he or she operates. We'll consider the pressures that nation-states face as they try to preserve their cultures and still take advantage of the new technologies. We'll examine how leading sociologists and business researchers have defined culture and learn their insights for the conduct of business. We'll take a look at a couple of best practice examples, Toyota and Coca-Cola, and see how these firms, the local firms, which are their partners, and their executives operate in a foreign environment. Finally, we'll identify 3 principles for being an effective multicultural global manager and leader: receptivity, flexibility, and a strong sense of one's own cultural identity. Think global, act local. That mantra of both executives and environmentalists is perhaps the most familiar reflection of these pressures. The advice so carried has been distilled further into the word glocalization. The tension between the global and the local is certainly part and parcel of the New World Order, and not always in a benign way for all concerned. Rutgers University political scientist Benjamin Barber, in his book Macworld versus Jihad, describes the inherent conflict between the forces of globalization, markets, and homogenization, which he characterized as the Macworld phenomenon, and the forces of localization, heterogeneity, hierarchy, and tradition, to which he gave the name jihad, meaning struggle. Knowledge creation and transfer of information is at the heart of this conflict. As futurist Alvin Toffler has noted, the economies of scale and learning by doing possibilities inherent in knowledge-based comparative advantage mean that the old North-South conflict between developed and developing nations is turning into a conflict between nations which are fast and those which are slow. Fast nations have the educational infrastructure to keep up with the latest knowledge and to tap into the global network of knowledge development. Slow countries are essentially disconnected from the global network and thus have no established institutional mechanism for creating and recreating knowledge. But as the slow try to become fast, they call into question some of their most cherished traditions. Now, how would we characterize these traditions, the culture of a society? E.B. Taylor in 1871 wrote that culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and other capabilities acquired by people as members of society. Values and norms are the essential elements of culture. Values are what a society believes to be good, right, and desirable, and span a range of political and social beliefs, nearly always held with a great deal of emotional intensity. Norms are social rules which prescribe behavior in certain situations, such as shaking hands upon meeting in the West and bowing in Japan. Values and norms are formed and modified continuously by a host of factors, including language, both spoken and unspoken, social structure, that is, the role of the individual versus the group, and the degree of class stratification that exists. Religion also plays a key role, as do political philosophy, economic philosophy, and a society's attitude toward education. Geert Hofstede was among the first to relate national culture to values in the workplace. His work has been followed by that of Michael Bond, Harry Triandis, and others. Hofstede found 4 dimensions along which cultures could be clustered: collectivism, individualism; power distance, which is how society deals with physical and intellectual inequalities among people; masculinity, femininity; and uncertainty avoidance. A diagram of how different national cultures match up on the 2 dimensions of individualism and power distance suggests certain country groupings. Most Latin American nations, for example, fall in the quadrant with a high index of power distance and a relatively low index of individualism. North American nations, in contrast, tend to be in the opposite quadrant with lower than average power distance indexes and higher than average individualism indexes. Cultures from the European continent, France, Italy, and Spain, occupy the quadrant with high index readings of both. Business dealings between individuals representing national cultures in different quadrants require an extra degree of cultural sensitivity and patience. Now, how can a corporate entrepreneur operationalize his knowledge of the determinants of culture? How much of one's culture should one keep while operating abroad, and how much space should one give to the local culture? Is it best for companies to try to create a Macworld style of management, a relatively homogeneous culture within the company worldwide? Or should managers at the margin strive to give voice to local needs and customs? Let's look at the experience of 2 of the world's leading corporations, Coca-Cola and Toyota, as they operate in each other's home markets. Coca-Cola has been in Japan continuously for about 40 years, though it was introduced briefly in the early 20th century and again in the post-war American occupation. As suggested by the following video clip, provided as part of the supplemental materials to accompany the international business text authored by Charles Hill, Coke has penetrated the Japanese market with an effective blend of a sound product, presence via alliances with powerful local bottlers, and protocol which respects Japanese customs. Still, where it gave the company a critical competitive advantage, Coke was not shy about introducing its direct-to-retail distribution methods, which flew in the face of Japanese norms.
When we introduced Coca-Cola, we introduced a store-door delivery system. And our bottlers in the beginning had a very difficult time in convincing the local population that this was the way to go. The second aspect of it, which was a major hurdle, was that in the beginning, all of our products were sold for cash. And in Japan, based on the cultural experiences, bills were usually paid back then once or twice a year. So, you know, they'd say, well, why don't you come back once you regain your senses and start trying to do business in Japan like the rest of the normal people.
However, through years of hard work and the strength of the bottling system, Coca-Cola prevailed over initial skepticism and instituted in Japan practices that had proved successful for the company around the world. Still, there are concessions to the Japanese style of doing business. For instance, here at the Fuji bottling plant, most of the workers are under lifetime employment, a practice reflecting the Japanese belief that long-term commitments result in more fruitful business relationships. Decision-making is based on consensus. This form is called a ringi-sho. It contains a proposal to which each division or section head must put his stamp of approval before any action is taken. Even the head office in Tokyo operates as what Vice President Frank Kelly calls a hybrid company.
Here in Japan, we would assist our Japanese employees in purchasing a home. Low-interest loans, as an example. We have a number of social clubs within the company. Ikebana, Japanese flower arranging. What we have here is more of a group activities. We do a lot of things as a team, as a group, rather than individualists.
Another ingredient to success in Japan is to tailor products to meet the tastes of local consumers. For Coca-Cola, this has meant developing a whole new line of products that fall under the broad definition of soft drinks in Japan.
In 1970s, the Japanese farmers had overproduced their supply of Mikan oranges. And they came to us and said, is there anything Coca-Cola might be able to do in order to use up this excess supply? And what we did was we formulated a high C 50% juice drink, and thereby generated the eternal gratefulness of the Japanese farmers.
Coke's advertising strategy also tries to cultivate its corporate image as a good citizen, and the fact that the product has become very much a part of everyday existence in Japan.
We want to closely identify with the Japanese people. We want to be part of the local community. Yes, we are an international company, but most importantly, we want to be considered Japanese and relate to our Japanese consumers.
Over the years, Coca-Cola has strengthened its relationship with Japan to become a classic case of foreign business success here. It holds over 30% of the soft drink market share and over 90% of the cola market. Its distribution system sells to over 1 million dealers. It operates over 700,000 vending machines across the country, and it is also a technological innovator for the company's worldwide operations. Still, it must be remembered that this kind of success isn't achieved overnight, especially not in Japan.
I'll tell you a secret. I think the most important thing that you have to learn as a foreigner in Japan is to develop or to have patience. Patience is very important because consensus building is a key to success here. So you have to be patient. You have to let things develop.
It is interesting to note that Pepsi-Cola, which was introduced to the Japanese market around the same time as Coke, has been a minor competitor. Many have attributed Pepsi's weak performance to its inability to find strong local partners to help get business started.
So perhaps the most important key to Coca-Cola's success in Japan is the establishment of a powerful local presence. As a multi-local company, Coke was able to institute a distribution network that ran counter to Japanese tradition. At the same time, it also adopted local business and social practices that reflect its long-term commitment to Japan and its corporate image as a good citizen. And though it already had a world-renowned product line, Coca-Cola Japan readily developed new products to meet changing market trends and needs.
Of course, it did help that Coca-Cola was a successful multinational corporation to begin with. But one lesson is clear. In order to succeed in Japan, you have to maintain some form of local presence. It could be an agent or a distributor or a subsidiary, but you have to make it clear that you take the Japanese market seriously and that you are in it for the long term. Otherwise, you won't be taken seriously.
We have seen that Coca-Cola followed a protocol which respected Japanese customs, but also introduced its direct-to-retail distribution methods. Toyota has adopted much the same approach in the United States. Toyota has acted as a good corporate citizen, as suggested by this sponsorship of the National Center for Family Literacy in Kentucky, near its Georgetown plant. At the same time, Toyota has moved aggressively to upgrade the quality of its parts suppliers by teaching them the methods of just-in-time production. Flexengate, a bumper manufacturer, is the subject of this Toyota video, also supplied with the Hill text.
At Flexengate's Bumper Works, to achieve a rapid improvement meant a change from their previous batch processing to producing a small quantity of each product every day to match the incoming orders. But to do this required a major reduction in the die setup times.
That's true. In any major industry, one of the keys to running short lots, small lots, is being able to minimize the die setup time. We've been very successful in reducing our die time changeover from 44 minutes to under 20, cutting our overall time by 50%. That's allowed us to be very effective in meeting the demands of just-in-time.
Over a period of 10 weeks, guided by the TMS project team who had received specialist hands-on training in Japan, Bumper Works made major changes in the equipment and procedures. Dies were standardized with common plates, special clamping devices, locating wedges, and cushion pin holders. D-blocks are attached directly to the dies to help align them. Special storage stands for each die are placed close to the press. And innovative staging devices are employed to move the dies into position. With these and other techniques, by mid-July, the average setup time was cut in half to 22 minutes.
Yeah, since they've moved the dies down here to the next to the heim, it's so much easier. It saves a lot of time. You know, and then all I have to do is just back it in, right into the rack. Instead of traveling all the way down to the end of the building, you just slide it in here. It makes it so much quicker on our die changes.
Both of these leading corporations have approached the issue of operating internationally by using the technologies in production and distribution which are part of their competitive advantage, adapting these technologies to the local market where necessary. In their management of human resources and in their place in the community, however, the companies have been sensitive to local norms. The local firms interfacing with these multinationals also had to adapt their business styles and practices. They had to be open to new influences, particularly in matters related to the technology of production and distribution. At the same time, they had to emphasize to their partners, Toyota and Coca-Cola, which features of local culture and business practice that the multinational firms had to respect. It is difficult for local firms to strike the proper balance between openness to new influences and reinforcement of local norms. Some false steps are to be expected, but local firms must try to adapt if they are to participate in the globalization process. In my view, the most effective global corporations, whether large or small, and indeed the most influential nations in the 21st century, will be those which develop a refined balance between three traits. One, their receptivity to and ability to filter external stimuli. Two, their flexibility and adaptability. That is, their capability to modify current practice to incorporate new ideas. And three, their cultural identity. Receptivity is important because the source of comparative advantage has shifted irreversibly in the direction of knowledge. Filtering capability is essential because of the sheer volume of information being transmitted and generated. As an example of the receptivity of a nation, I would cite the capability of a resident in Japan to watch each night on the public NHK channel via satellite the news broadcasts from a dozen nations around the globe, subtitled in Japanese. This is obviously not a feat beyond the reach of current technology, and yet the United States government has not seen fit to subsidize this service for its citizenry. Flexibility and adaptability are essential too, in that one must be able to change when one knows that change is necessary. The United States is thought to be an adaptable, flexible culture, owing in part to the continuous meshing and mixing of cultures and its long tradition of a free press and a democratic form of government. But the once powerful American steel and auto industries became complacent and lost their entrepreneurial energy. This teaches us that there are limits to the advantages of a democratic melting pot tradition. For corporations, being both receptive to external stimuli and flexible enough to adapt to them can create special strains. As IBM found when trying to bring out its first personal computer, its size and centralized bureaucracy were a distinct disadvantage. It had to create a standalone unit in Boca Raton, Florida, to get the job done. Now, decentralization contributes to corporate flexibility by fostering intrapreneurship. It can also promote corporate receptivity by increasing the number of sensor units that interface with the external environment. But decentralization also adds substantially to the difficulty of coordinating the entire enterprise and ensuring that it moves in the appropriate strategic direction. This is where the ability to transfer information internally within the corporation becomes essential. I'm not just talking about hardware here, though of course that is a prerequisite for effective internal information transfer. More fundamental is the fact that the corporation's cultural identity must be well established. For culture itself is a mechanism for information transfer. Culture defines how questions and opportunities are approached and indicates certain avenues to reach answers and formulate strategies. Any foreigner doing business in Japan is impressed with the extraordinary advantage firms there have in operating in an environment in which the norms of corporate and national culture are so well established. And any non-European doing business on the continent more than a decade ago was similarly impressed with the substantial difficulty the range of European languages and cultures presented for effective operations